The Complete History of Alexander the Great. Step 1. Early Life and Education. 336 BCE. In the year 356 BCE, in the ancient city of Pella, the capital of the Macedonian kingdom, a child was born who would forever change the world. His name was Alexander, the son of King Philip II of Macedon and Queen Olympias. Legend has it that on the night of his birth, the temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, was set ablaze. Many saw this as a divine omen. The goddess herself had abandoned her temple to witness the birth of a future conqueror. Alexander's childhood was shaped by two powerful figures. Philip II, a brilliant warrior king who had transformed Macedonia into the most formidable military power in Greece. Olympias, a deeply spiritual and ambitious queen, who told Alexander that he was no ordinary child, but a descendant of the mighty heroes of Greek mythology. Some even said she whispered to him that his true father was Zeus, king of the gods. From an early age, Alexander displayed courage and determination. At the age of 12, he famously tamed a wild horse named Bucephalus, which no one else could control. While others gave up, Alexander noticed the horse was afraid of its own shadow. With patience and intelligence, he calmed the beast and rode it. Bucephalus would become his lifelong companion, carrying him into countless battles. But Alexander's education went beyond military training. His father brought in one of the greatest philosophers of all time, Aristotle. Under Aristotle's guidance, Alexander studied philosophy, science, medicine, and literature. He learned about the works of Homer, especially the epic tale of the Iliad, which became his favorite book. He kept a copy of it under his pillow throughout his life, seeing himself as a new Achilles destined for glory. Aristotle's teachings left a deep mark. He taught Alexander the idea of a universal empire where Greek culture, knowledge, and civilization could spread across the world. This vision would stay with Alexander, influencing how he ruled and how he saw his destiny. By his teenage years, Alexander was already proving himself as a commander. At just 16, when Philip went off to war, Alexander was left in charge of Macedonia. He quickly crushed a revolt and founded his first city, Alexandropolis. His ambition was already shining through, but life in Macedonia was never peaceful. The Greek city-states, once united against Persia, were constantly fighting each other. Philip II had united them under his rule through diplomacy and war, forming the League of Corinth. His next goal was to lead the Greeks in a grand campaign against their old enemy, the Persian Empire. Yet fate had other plans. In 336 BCE, during a grand wedding celebration, Philip II was assassinated, stabbed by one of his own bodyguards. The court was thrown into chaos. Rivals sought to claim the throne, and enemies whispered of rebellion. But the 20-year-old Alexander acted swiftly. With a mix of ruthlessness and brilliance, he secured his position as king. Potential rivals were eliminated, and his authority was established. The young prince was now Alexander III of Macedon, king of Macedonia. The world was about to witness the rise of Alexander the Great. Step 2. Rise 2. Power and the Persian Campaign. When Philip II of Macedon was assassinated in 336 BCE, his empire stood on the edge of collapse. The Greek city-states whispered of rebellion, rivals at court schemed, and foreign powers waited eagerly for the young and untested king to fail. But Alexander, only 20 years old, moved with astonishing speed. He had inherited not just a throne, but also his father's vision, to lead the united Greek world into a campaign against the mighty Persian Empire, which for centuries had threatened Greece. Before that dream could begin, however, Alexander had to secure his kingdom, securing Macedonia and Greece. Upon Philip's death, many Greek city-states thought it was their chance to break free from Macedonian control. Thebes, Athens, and Sparta considered rebellion, but Alexander would not allow his father's achievements to unravel. He marched south with the Macedonian army, a force drilled to perfection by Philip. His weapon was the phalanx, a tight formation of infantry armed with long spears called sarissas, supported by elite cavalry. The sight of this army, combined with Alexander's fiery presence, was enough to silence Athens and other cities. But in 335 BCE, Thebes dared to revolt. Believing the young king too inexperienced, They declared independence. Alexander responded with decisive brutality. He stormed Thebes, destroyed its walls, and razed the city to the ground. Over 6,000 Thebans were killed, and the survivors were sold into slavery. This act shocked all of Greece. It was a warning. Rebellion would not be tolerated. The other city-states quickly submitted, and Alexander was confirmed as commander of the League of Corinth, inheriting Philip's role as leader of the Greek world. Now nothing stood in the way of his father's grand plan, the invasion of Persia. Crossing into Asia Minor. In 334 BCE, Alexander gathered an army of around 40,000 soldiers, Macedonian phalanx infantry, Greek hoplites, elite cavalry, and allied forces. Though smaller than the Persian forces, this army was disciplined and fiercely loyal. Before leaving Greece, Alexander made a symbolic gesture. At the city of Troy, the legendary site of the Trojan War, he visited the tomb of Achilles, his childhood hero. There he offered sacrifices, declaring himself the new Achilles destined for glory. Then he crossed the Hellespont, modern-day Dardanelles, into Asia Minor, setting foot on Persian territory. The War of Conquest had begun. The Battle of the Granicus, 334 BCE, the Persian satraps, governors, quickly gathered an army to meet Alexander at the river Granicus in modern-day Turkey. The Persians expected an easy victory, but Alexander showed his trademark courage and audacity. He personally led a cavalry charge across the river, fighting in the front lines despite the danger. His helmet was struck, his sword shattered, but he continued fighting. His men rallied behind him, and the Persians were crushed. The victory at Granicus opened the gates of Asia Minor. City after city surrendered, some welcoming him as a liberator. Alexander declared himself not just a conqueror, but a deliverer of the Greeks living under Persian rule. March into Asia, the legend grows. After Granicus, Alexander advanced deeper into Asia Minor. He freed the Greek cities along the coast, including the wealthy city of Ephesus. His reputation grew with every step. But Alexander was not only a warrior, he was also a strategist and a politician. He allowed local rulers to keep their positions if they pledged loyalty. He respected religious traditions and adopted Persian customs when it suited him. This flexibility made him not just feared, but also admired. Yet the greatest challenge still awaited him. The Persian king himself, Darius III, was preparing to meet Alexander with the full might of the empire. The Battle of Issus, 333 BCE. In 333 BCE, Alexander faced Darius for the first time near the town of Issus in southern Anatolia. The Persians had a massive army, perhaps over 100,000 men, though numbers are debated. Alexander's force was far smaller, perhaps only 40,000. Darius positioned his army on the narrow plain between the mountains and the sea, thinking his numbers would overwhelm the Macedonians. But Alexander's tactical brilliance turned the situation to his advantage. He led his cavalry in a daring maneuver, striking directly at the Persian center where Darius was positioned. The Macedonian phalanx advanced steadily, while Alexander and his cavalry smashed through the Persian lines. The sight of Alexander charging toward him terrified Darius. The Persian king panicked and fled the battlefield in his chariot, leaving behind his army, his treasure, and even his family. It was an unthinkable humiliation. The great king of Persia had been defeated by a 23-year-old Macedonian. Alexander captured Darius's mother, wife, and daughters, but treated them with great respect and dignity. This act of honor further increased his reputation, not only as a conqueror, but also as a noble ruler. Alexander's reputation grows. The victory at Issus made Alexander a legend. All of Greece and much of Asia saw him as unstoppable. To his men, he was not just a king, but a living hero. To his enemies, he was a force of destiny. But Alexander was not yet satisfied. He dreamed of more than defeating Darius. He sought to conquer the entire Persian Empire and beyond. His next goal was the rich and powerful region of Egypt. The road to empire had only just begun. Step 3. Conquests and battles. From Egypt to Gaugamela. 332 BCE. After the stunning victory at Issus in 333 BCE, Alexander had achieved what many thought impossible. He had defeated the mighty Persian king Darius III in open battle. Yet, the Persian Empire was vast, and Darius still controlled enormous armies and wealth. Alexander could not yet declare victory. His next move would prove both strategic and symbolic. Control the eastern Mediterranean, and then strike at the very heart of Persia. The siege of Tyre, 332 BCE, Alexander first turned southward to secure the coastal cities of the Levant. Most surrendered without resistance. But one city refused, Tyre, a powerful island fortress off the coast of modern Lebanon. Tyre believed it was untouchable. Its high walls rose from the sea nearly a kilometer offshore. The Persians had long relied on Tyre as a naval stronghold, but Alexander refused to be denied. He ordered a massive causeway built, a land bridge stretching from the mainland to the island, using timber, stones, and rubble. Day by day, his men advanced across the sea, under constant attack from Tyrian defenders. The siege lasted 7 months. Finally, Alexander brought in warships, battering rams, and siege towers. His army stormed the walls and Tyre fell. The city was brutally punished as an example. Thousands were killed or sold into slavery. The fall of Tyre sent shockwaves across the Mediterranean. Alexander had proven that no city, no matter how strong, could resist him. The conquest of Egypt, 331 BCE. After Tyre, Alexander marched into Egypt, a wealthy province of Persia. But unlike Tyre, Egypt did not resist. For centuries, Egyptians had been under Persian rule, and many saw Alexander as a liberator. When he entered Memphis, the people welcomed him as a pharaoh. Alexander was crowned as the legitimate king of Egypt, adopting Egyptian customs and presenting himself as chosen by their gods. It was in Egypt that Alexander founded one of his greatest legacies, the city of Alexandria, on the Nile Delta. This city would later become one of the greatest centers of learning, trade, and culture in the ancient world. But Alexander's ambitions in Egypt went beyond politics. He traveled into the Siwa oasis, deep in the desert, to consult the oracle of the god Amun. According to legend, the oracle greeted him as the son of Zeus Ammon, confirming the divine destiny that Olympius had whispered to him since childhood. From that moment on, Alexander believed more firmly than ever that he was not just a mortal king, but chosen by the gods themselves to rule the world. The road to Gaugamela. By 331 BCE, Alexander had secured the eastern Mediterranean and Egypt. Now, he turned eastward toward the Persian heartland. Darius III, humiliated after Issus, had not been idle. He had gathered a new, enormous army. Some sources claim over 250,000. Soldiers, including cavalry, infantry, archers, and even terrifying war elephants from India. The decisive confrontation would take place at Gaugamela, near modern-day Mosul in Iraq. The Battle of Gaugamela, 331 BCE. On the morning of October 1st, 331 BCE, two worlds stood face to face. On one side, Alexander's army of about 47,000, disciplined and hardened by years of campaigning. On the other, Darius's massive force, stretched across the plains, confident in sheer numbers. Darius had carefully chosen the battlefield, a wide, open plain ideal for his cavalry and chariots. He even ordered the ground leveled to allow his war chariots to move freely. But Alexander, as always, was ready to turn the enemy's strength into weakness. The battle began with Persian cavalry assaults on Alexander's flanks. The Macedonian lines held firm. Then Alexander executed his brilliant maneuver. He rode with his companion cavalry, diagonally across the battlefield, drawing part of the Persian army away and creating a gap in their center. At the perfect moment, Alexander wheeled his cavalry around and charged straight through the opening, heading directly toward Darius himself. Once again, the sight of Alexander bearing down on him filled Darius with terror. The Persian king abandoned his army and fled for the second time. Without their leader, the Persian troops broke and scattered. The battlefield became a massacre. Tens of thousands of Persians were killed. Alexander's losses were minimal by comparison. The fall of the Persian Empire. The victory at Gaugamela was decisive. It shattered the Persian Empire's power. Alexander marched into the Persian capitals, Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis. At Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of Persia, Alexander allowed his men to loot the city's treasures. Later, in a drunken celebration, the palace of Xerxes was set ablaze. Some say Alexander ordered it to avenge Persia's earlier destruction of Athens. Others claim it was an accident of revelry. Either way, the burning of Persepolis symbolized the end of the old Persian Empire. Alexander, once a young prince of Macedonia, was now the ruler of the greatest empire the world had ever known. But for Alexander, this was not the end. His ambition knew no limits. Persia was conquered, but he hungered for more. His eyes turned east, toward the mysterious lands of India. Step 4. Expansion into India, 327, 325 BCE. With Persia conquered after the victory at Gaugamela and the burning of Persepolis, Alexander stood as master of the largest empire the world had ever seen. But for Alexander, conquest was not simply about power or wealth, it was about destiny. He saw himself as chosen by the gods to rule the entire known world. And beyond Persia lay lands rich in mystery and promise, India. Marched through Central Asia, Bactria, and Sogdiana. Before reaching India, Alexander had to secure the eastern provinces of the Persian Empire, Bactria and Sogdiana, modern Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. These rugged lands were inhabited by fierce tribes who resisted Macedonian control. The campaigns were brutal. Guerrilla fighters harassed his army in mountain passes and deserts. Alexander personally led sieges, often exposing himself to great danger. It was in these regions that Alexander married Roxana, a local Bactrian princess. The marriage was both a personal choice and a political move, meant to unite Macedonians and Persians. This blending of cultures, what historians call Hellenistic fusion, became a hallmark of his rule. Though these campaigns were grueling, Alexander's persistence secured the eastern frontier, allowing him to finally march toward India. Crossing into India 327 BCE, in 327 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hindu Kush Mountains into the lands of modern Pakistan. To the Greeks, India was a land of wonder, filled with strange animals, mighty rivers, and legendary riches. The journey was not easy. His army faced monsoon rains, unfamiliar terrain, and fierce resistance from local kingdoms. Yet Alexander pressed on, determined to reach the edge of the known world. The Battle of the Hydaspes, 326 BCE, one of Alexander's most famous battles, took place on the banks of the Hydaspes River, modern Jhelum River in Pakistan, in 326 BCE. Here he faced King Porus, a powerful ruler who commanded a large army, including something the Macedonians had never faced before: war elephants. Porus stationed his elephants along the riverbank, their massive forms creating terror among Alexander's troops. The river itself was swollen from monsoon rains, making a direct crossing nearly impossible. But Alexander was a master of strategy. He feigned preparations for a frontal assault, while secretly leading a portion of his army upstream under the cover of night. Crossing the river at a hidden point, he surprised Porus by attacking from the flank. The battle was fierce. The elephants caused havoc among the Macedonians, trampling soldiers and spreading chaos. But Alexander's phalanx held firm, and his cavalry outmaneuvered Porus's forces. In the end, Porus was defeated. But Alexander was so impressed by his bravery and leadership that he restored him as ruler, granting him even more territory. This moment showed a different side of Alexander. Though ruthless when necessary, he could also be magnanimous to worthy opponents. The limits of conquest. After Hydaspes, Alexander pressed further east, dreaming of reaching the Ganges River and conquering all of India. But his army had reached its limit. For nearly a decade, they had marched across deserts, mountains, and vast empires. They had fought countless battles, faced unimaginable hardships, and followed Alexander to the ends of the earth. But now, at the banks of the Hyphasis River, modern Beas River, his soldiers refused to go further. Exhausted and longing for home, they mutinied. For the first time, Alexander had to yield. Despite his desire for more conquest, he agreed to turn back. The journey back, through the Gedrosian Desert. Alexander did not return by the easiest route. Instead, he led part of his army through the Gedrosian Desert, modern-day Makran in Pakistan and Iran. It was one of the most grueling marches in history. The scorching sun, lack of water, and endless sand claimed thousands of lives. Men and animals perished, and supplies ran out. Alexander himself suffered alongside his troops, refusing water unless it could be shared by all. Though the desert crossing was a disaster, it cemented Alexander's bond with his soldiers. They had survived the impossible together. Return to Persia, 325 BCE. By 325 BCE, Alexander returned to Persia, his empire stretching from Greece to Egypt, from Mesopotamia to the edge of India. No conqueror before him had achieved such vast dominion in so short a time. But Alexander was not content simply to be a conqueror. He envisioned a unified empire, blending Greek and Persian cultures. He adopted Persian dress, encouraged intermarriage between his soldiers and local women, and integrated Persians into his administration. This vision, however, sparked tensions among his Macedonian troops, who saw themselves as conquerors, not equals with those they had defeated. Even so, Alexander pressed forward, planning new campaigns, possibly to Arabia and beyond. But destiny would intervene before he could realize those dreams. Step 5. Death and Legacy, 323 BCE and beyond. After nearly a decade of relentless conquest, Alexander returned to the Persian heartlands in 325 BCE. His empire now stretched over 5,000 kilometers, from Greece in the west to the Indus River in the east. No man before him had ever created such a vast dominion in so short a time. Yet despite his accomplishments, Alexander was restless. Conquest had become his identity, and peace did not suit him. He began planning his next campaign, the invasion of Arabia, and perhaps even further west into Carthage and Rome, or east toward the mysterious lands of China. But fate would not allow him to march again. The last days of Alexander. In 323 BCE, Alexander and his army returned to Babylon, the great city on the Euphrates, which he had made one of his capitals. There, preparations began for his Arabian expedition. But in late May, during a banquet and celebration, Alexander fell ill. Accounts differ, but within a few days, he developed a high fever and severe weakness. Despite the efforts of his physicians, his condition worsened. For nearly 2 weeks, Alexander lingered between life and death. Ancient sources describe how his soldiers, grieving and desperate, were allowed to file past his bed, each man saying farewell to the leader who had led them across the world. On June 10th or 11th, 323 BCE, at the age of only 32, Alexander the Great died. Theories of his death. The cause of Alexander's death has been debated for over 2 millennia. Ancient writers suggested poisoning, perhaps by one of his generals or political rivals. Malaria or typhoid fever, common in the marshes around Babylon. Autoimmune disease or infection, made worse by exhaustion from years of campaigning. Whatever the cause, his sudden death left his empire leaderless and fragile. The division of the empire, the wars of the successors. Before dying, Alexander was asked to whom he would leave his empire. His answer, according to legend, was, "To the strongest." These words sealed the fate of his empire. Without a clear heir, his only son, Alexander IV, was born. After his death. His generals, known as the Diadochi, began to fight for control. The once united empire shattered into pieces. Ptolemy took Egypt, founding the Ptolemaic dynasty, whose most famous ruler was Cleopatra. Seleucus gained control of Mesopotamia and much of Persia, forming the Seleucid Empire. Antigonus and his descendants held Macedonia and Greece. For decades, the successors waged wars against each other, carving up Alexander's empire. Though his empire did not survive intact, his legacy lived on. The legacy of Alexander the Great. Despite his early death, Alexander's impact on history was immense. His legacy can be seen in multiple ways. 1. The spread of Greek culture. Alexander's conquests spread Greek language, art, and ideas across the known world. This era, called the Hellenistic Age, saw the blending of Greek culture with Egyptian, Persian, and Indian traditions. Cities like Alexandria in Egypt became centers of learning, science, and philosophy. 2. Military genius. Alexander is remembered as one of the greatest generals in history. He never lost a battle, despite often being outnumbered. His tactics, like the use of the phalanx and cavalry coordination, are still studied in military academies today. Political vision. Unlike many conquerors, Alexander sought to unite different peoples. He adopted Persian customs, encouraged marriages between his soldiers and local women, and envisioned a world empire where East and West were blended. Though not fully realized, this idea influenced future empires. 4. Inspiration to future leaders. From Julius Caesar to Napoleon Bonaparte, countless leaders admired Alexander. Caesar is said to have wept when he saw a statue of Alexander, lamenting that he had achieved so little by the same age. 5. A mythic figure. Even after death, Alexander became a legend. Stories spread across the world, from Europe to the Middle East to India. In some traditions, he became a hero, in others, a demigod. And in Islamic literature, he appears as Dhul Qarnayn, the two-horned one, the man who dreamed of the world. Alexander's life was short, but in those 32 years, he achieved what no one else dared to dream. He united Greece, destroyed the Persian Empire, marched into India, and created a legacy that lasted for centuries. Though his empire crumbled after his death, the cultural and historical waves he set in motion reshaped the ancient world. His name endures even today, 2,300 years later, as a symbol of ambition, courage, and vision. He was not without flaws. He could be ruthless, prideful, and consumed by ambition. Yet it is precisely this mix of genius and imperfection that makes him so fascinating. Alexander the Great was more than a conqueror. He was a force of history, a man who sought not just to rule, but to be remembered forever. And in that he succeeded.